Hey guys, welcome back to FOAP Academy, where today we will be talking about composition. Composition is a really hard thing to teach because there's no wrong or right way to set up your photo. But if you're just starting out with photography and if you want a couple of tips just to get you on the right track, here are some things to keep in mind. Well, first of all, what are the elements of photography? Line, shape, form, texture, color, pattern, and space. To practice our composition skills, something my photography teacher had us do was to take a picture that emphasized each of the elements of art. So for example, one photo that emphasized color, a photo that emphasized line, a photo that emphasized texture. Even if you don't use all of these elements, and you probably shouldn't use all of these elements in every photo, if you're just starting out, thinking about these elements can really help you start to compose your own photos. Now let's get into some tips about composition. Tip number one is to focus on your subject-background relationship. Your background should not be the focus of your photo unless your background is your subject. Otherwise, you're going to really distract people from the message you are trying to convey. So what you want to do is use the framing within your camera to really draw people's eyes towards your subject and not the background. In addition, you can make sure that your background is not full of distracting elements that take away from the focus of your photo. This brings me to tip number two, which is placing the subject of your photo. Now, probably the most common rule photographers use when placing subjects is the rule of thirds. Even if you've never heard of this, you probably already use it subconsciously when taking photos. Humans, for whatever reason, really like the number 3. In the rule of thirds, your photo is divided up into thirds both horizontally and vertically, and your subject is placed either along one of those lines or at one of their intersections. It creates a really well-balanced scene. A third tip to help draw your audience's eye in is to use leading lines. These are the types of photos you see when you're standing on the front of a dock and you see it leading you down into the blue water. Leading lines really draw your eye towards the center of a photo, often towards some sort of subject. And when you're trying to make your photos stand out in a massive gallery of photos, this really works to pull people into your story. A fourth tip is to frame your subject in some way. Now, of course, you're already framing it by using composition to place it against your background, but you can also use your foreground to frame your subject. This can be a natural frame such as a tree, a hole in a fence. You can also just use a literal frame or a mirror. Lots of photographers use this to create photos that are different from the rest and will stand out in a big collection of photos against all the other ones. In addition, it really helps your subject stand out, especially if you have a busy background. A fifth tip is to look for patterns and geometrical shapes. We as humans are really satisfied by patterns and neat shapes. So if you can find some of these in your photo, it'll really help balance it out and pull people's eyes into the scene. And you can really find patterns in almost anything. In palm trees lining a street, in rows of corn, even in desks in a classroom or office cubicles. Patterns are pretty much everywhere, so they're pretty easy to incorporate into your photo in some way. Geometrical shapes as well are pretty easy to find, especially when you live in, say, a big city with lots of skyscrapers and windows, or if you live in nature and you look at pine cones and beehives, you can find geometrical shapes pretty much anywhere, so it shouldn't be too hard to find some and put them into your photos. A sixth tip that you may not have heard of, and even I hadn't until about an hour ago, is the rule of odds. The rule of odds suggests that your photo will be more visually appealing if you have an odd number of subjects. So for example, 3 people lined up, 3 doors, 1 dog, 5 dogs. This isn't always the case. For example, you can have 2 people in a photo and have it convey just as appealing of a message, but the rule of odds is something that a lot of photographers try to use to create a very balanced and visually appealing photo. A seventh tip, I know when you were in art class in middle school, your teacher always told you had to fill the entire paper, but that isn't necessarily true in photography. You don't have to fill the entire frame. Negative space, which is space that is just not filled with anything, is really good for drawing your eye towards your subject and maybe creating a certain mood. So don't be afraid to leave negative space if that helps you convey your message. Rule number 8 is don't be afraid to crop. Of course, it is always better to crop your photo in real life as you're taking it, but if you get on the computer later and you see that there is something really distracting in the corner of your photo, you should probably crop that out. Tip number 9, change your point of view. If everyone around you is taking photos facing straight ahead, your photo's not going to really stand out from everyone else's. But if you can take it from a different angle, it'll really catch people's eyes and stand out from other people's photos in the same spot. The color red is extremely potent to the human eye. So even if you can't find patterns, you can't find leading lines, you can't really use any elements of composition in your photography, which is very unlikely, by the way. If you can find a pop of the color red and use it in your photo, it will help it to stand out in a massive gallery of photos. Studies have actually shown that photos that have pops of the color red are more likely to win contests. But again, keep in mind that your photo is your photo and you don't need to follow any of these rules to make it beautiful. That's all for today. Those are the 10 tips that I personally think will help you the most getting started out in composing your own photos. But if you want more photography tutorials, subscribe to FOAP's YouTube channel and find the FOAP app to get involved with photographers all around the world and start improving and selling your photos today. Happy shooting, FOAPers!